Okay, hello everyone. I know I stand between you and a behavioral wine tasting, so I'm going to keep it brief and I'm going to do my very best to keep it entertaining. So I'm going to be talking about the OBI score and how it can help you, yourselves and your clients construct portfolios that are relevant to their objectives. Okay, but before that, I'm going to talk about some findings that I've had from a behavioral study that I've looked at. So over the past few weeks, I actually beat the other studies in there. They only had 20,000 and 60,000 cases. I had a study of 177,000 cases. But if you think about it, each new investment that's placed on the Momentum Wealth platform, just think about the process that happens. Okay, there's a human mind that's sitting there and saying, I've got an investment, there's a monetary amount that's going to be invested, and I think the correct funds for this investment are the following funds. Okay, so that has happened 177,000 times in this study, and I've looked at the behavior and I've looked at I've seen some significant findings about how people make their investment choices. But before that, a quick story about what happened to me many years ago. So just as I moved to Pretoria, I had to travel to Joburg one morning for work purposes, and as I set out to my destination, I'm onto the N1. A few minutes later, I started to make a bit of a calculation. I said to myself, I've got about an hour to get there. The N1 generally travels about 60 kilometers an hour. In bad mornings, I'll probably be able to make 30 kilometers an hour. So I should be able to make it, but I had one problem. I started off on the N1, but I wasn't on the N1 anymore. Because being a novice to traveling between Pretoria and Johannesburg, I heard a traffic report. And there was someone said, or the reporter said, that there's a problem on the N1, there's an accident. And knee-jerk reaction, first thing I did, I turned the car left, got onto the first off-ramp, and now I'm sitting on the old Johannesburg road, and things are looking way worse on the old Johannesburg road than it's looking on the N1. I can actually see the cars going by, every single one of them breaking the speed limit, and I'm sitting going very, very slowly. If you think about that, that is very similar to a behavior gap in investments. Okay, you start off on a specific journey, you take that decision, you know what you want to do, you know where you need to get to, but as soon as things start to get choppy, you start to make changes. You chop and you change. Okay, sometimes you don't even have to wait. Sometimes with the information at hand, you make that decision even before you get into the investment markets. And I can show you here from the study, you can see that the difference between conservative funds, let me just get the pointer, the difference between conservative funds that was invested into and balanced funds just after the financial crisis is significantly different to the long-term trend. Okay? What I'm glad to see was actually that the equity exposure, people going directly into equity markets, or equity unit trust, was about 10%, which is way higher than the long-term average that was about 5%. Okay? And if you think about it, did people's needs actually change over that period? No. People still needed to get to CPI plus 6. Okay? So the OPI score is something that you can use as a behavioral prosthetic, as Greg has said, to make sure that when you have got a client need, that you actually invest into a fund or into a portfolio that's actually constructed to get you to the outcome with a high probability. Okay? But on this, I need to say something that I'm already judging this, and there's a human propensity for me to look at, what was the result. Okay? Because I'm judging these results here, investing into equity. I was lucky enough to put sort of a half of a salary in at that point in time. I just started out, I was just 5 or 10 years starting into my working career. So I had a little bit to allocate to equity, and I did it, and I was very pleased with the result. But let's not judge a result or outcome or decision by the result. Let's judge a decision by the decision. Because we've got an outcomes bias. We just look at the final result, and whether it was a good decision or a bad decision, we disregard that. And I'll get back to that a bit later in the presentation. I'm not going to say a lot about this in the interest of time, but you can see that as the rand started to depreciate, there was also almost a 400% increase in money that was taken abroad, and most of that money, or a lot of that money, actually went abroad too late. But let me get to the main point of the study that I did. So I don't want to look at all the macroeconomic and the sentiment that's impacting on investment decisions. I wanted to understand a little bit more about the subtle choices. Okay, if you exclude us, we're an outcomes-based manager. If you just look at the single managers in South Africa, there are about 4 managers that's very well known in the industry. There's a name for them, but I'm not going to go into the managers now. But you can see, I wanted to understand, why do people select these fund managers over certain time periods? And you can see that the choice really differs vastly over time. Initially, Fund A had about 40 or 60% of the exposure onto our wealth new business platform, and eventually it decreases to about 30% just to gain popularity again here. And for me, this is actually a popularity contest. There's nothing more to it. You know, when a fund is popular, everyone flocks to that fund. And you can see here, I almost shouted out the fund's name right now. So there's a fund, wasn't very well known probably initially, about 5% of the flows went to that fund. And over time, it actually got to a point where about 25% of the flows that went into balanced funds on our platform went into that fund. It almost got into the second position, so to be the second best performing fund when it came to new business flows, but just to lose all that traction again. So why do we make this decision? Okay, so I did a bit of a study on that, and the reason for that is, I firstly wanted to understand what are the things that's affecting our behavior. Once I understand that, I wanted to see what is the financial consequences of that, and when I understand the financial consequences, I wanted to look if there's ways that we can change the behavior. Okay. So what drove the allocation? Just when you see those flows in monetary terms, firstly you need to understand what was the trends over time. And you can see when I plot in the average, over time a lot more money went into these balanced funds, and then balanced funds became a little bit more unpopular, and then there was a period where there was sort of a little bit of a loss in interest in balanced funds. Okay, but you would expect that funds follow that same trend. But you can see here, if we look at Fund A, there was periods where money was flowing into balanced funds, but it was actually standing still when it got to new business flows. And when in that period where balanced funds lost a bit of flows, it lost a lot more. But surprisingly, here at the end, where there was constant flows, that fund actually shot the lights out again when it came to new business flows. And I wanted to understand what was driving this. So firstly, I just plotted the difference between the average and the actual fund inflows there, and then I overlaid on top of it periods of positive flows, and then there was periods of negative flows. I really tried to make it as simple as possible for you to just visually see what happens over time. Okay. Then I added something else onto the graph, and what I did is I looked at the 4 funds, being the popular funds in the industry. I plotted their relative returns next to one another. So if Fund D did the worst, if Fund A did the worst, it would be there. If he did the best, it would probably be at about 10% there, of the 4. And when I overlay that relative performance, you can clearly see that for Fund A, relative performance, the last 12 months of relative performance had a huge impact or a huge correlation onto the flows that went into that fund. And that talks a lot about human behavior. We are really fixated on the recent performance that a fund has given. Now that was just for Fund A. If I go to Fund B and I do the same, you can see here, initially, strong performance, got a lot of the flows. Then a period where it was the worst performing of the funds, the flows sort of stopped, taps were closed, and then as performance increased again, you can see that fund just ran, and it just continues and continues. It's the same trend. Now, just to shake it up a bit, I didn't go to Fund C, I went to Fund D now. Alright, but you see, just remember that little shape there, okay? Because I've now plotted all the funds relative, or the relative performance of all funds. So the best fund you can see there, There you can see Fund B was actually the best performing fund at that point in time. And when I plot Fund D's relative performance on it, you can see actually what happened. So in the periods where Fund D was the best relative, it got great flows. There it got great flows again. But here it had strong flows, but it wasn't the best. Okay? And it sort of tells you that in this industry, us as humans, the fund needs to be the best. If it's not the best, then it's lost. If you're not first, you're lost. You don't get the flows if you're not the fastest or for that year period. Because for various other reasons, that 12-month performance actually carries back into your entire performance reporting. It's reflecting your 3-year performance, etc., etc. So, if I go to Fund C just quickly, you can see the same. And I would argue that because my study stopped in 2018, if I do the study 5 months from now, you will probably see this line spiking up again because relative to the others, it had the best performance in the market. Okay. So now that we know what's driving the behavior, what is driving flows into funds, and I don't think we must really focus just on balanced funds here. Okay. I think it happens across the industry. Money flowing into equity funds. I actually did the study, and you can see clearly that even in the same company, when that fund, it's got 2 equity funds. When the one equity fund outperforms, everyone is rushing to that. When the other one outperforms, everyone is rushing into that. And I think it goes across sectors as well. And it basically, if you think about 2008, when conservative funds were doing better than balanced funds, everyone just went to conservative funds. Okay? But this sort of did the work for a predictive study to say, what would happen next. And you can say that the predicted allocation to a fund would be its current allocation plus a function of its 1-year relative performance, plus a few other factors. How much marketing is spent on advertising these funds? Was the outperformance shared? What was the length of the outperformance? But you can also express it in terms of a bias. And we spoke about behavioral biases today. I would say it's herding mentality plus recent past performance. That's actually those 2 biases in conjunction just determines where money is flowing into the industry. But what about that? So what was the financial consequences of that? Okay? Because that's the main thing. It's not just about the behavior. You need to understand, is it negative, is it positive? Okay, is there a behavior gap? So to do that, I'm quickly just going to give you an analogy. So I looked at all these 177,000 cases and the decisions that was made historically. I'm going to say, but what if people made different decisions? Okay, so people had various alternative routes. What if they just stuck to one specific road? And everyone over the last 10 years invested their funds according to their initial allocation when the study started. I'm going to call that the N4. Okay, so if I look at the N4, everyone, all those investments into the initial allocation, that initial allocation actually outperformed what we did as a collective by 0.2% in the subsequent year after that investment was made. That's about a 30 million rand difference to the investors over the subsequent year. Okay, if I look at it slightly different, I'll call this, if that's the N4, I would say the N3 is basically to look at, if I look at the average allocation over time, not the initial one. Again, you can see about a 0.2% gap. So just using the average allocation did better than what we collectively did. Okay, slightly lower monetary amount, but it's just when the gap happened. Okay, at periods where there was a lot of inflows or little inflows, semantics. But what happened if you did the opposite? Okay, so I'm not saying do your fund selection like this from now on. I'm saying there's a different way that's actually scientific. But what if you ignored past performance? If you actually went to the funds that underperformed? So I built a quick algorithm just to say allocate to these funds that's underperforming, and the results was good. I didn't try and chase up that number. I did it once, got the result, and said, Bob's your uncle. So about 0.4% better performance in every subsequent year on average. That's about a 55 million rand increase for these investors. And then I said, okay, being at momentum, I obviously need to look at if they just went the outcomes-based route. I will call that the N1. And you can see there that the performance, if all of these funds just flowed into the Focus 7 fund, in every next year, if the investment was done 1 year later, measured what happened versus the OBI fund, the OBI fund actually outperformed. Okay. To look a little bit deeper into that, I wanted to, I'll keep this brief because we are running over time a bit, but I just looked at what was the distribution. Because we don't just go into a single strategy, for instance, in our equity space, because we blend various styles, you would always expect us, if there are 4 managers, to be in the middle. Okay. But as you can see, we outperformed. And what was actually clear from the study was to see that in most of the instances, we were actually in between the second and the third best performing fund, or in between the first and the second best performing fund, with some instances being the best, some instances being the worst of the 4. But what this said to me is, we would be very proud of that, because we pride ourselves not on being the fastest. We try and be the most consistent. Okay, this is a clear indication that if you use an OBI portfolio, there's a very good chance that you can have a lot of consistent outcomes and high probability outcomes. Okay, I'm going to run through these slides in the interest of time. It's just digging into the same point. But now I want to talk to you about the actual scientific way of creating a portfolio that's actually linked to a client need. And in this instance, a client need might be something like CPI plus 6. Okay. So I actually have one of the co-founders there at the back. You can talk to him afterwards, Ronnie, me, myself, and Paul. And let me talk to you about what we've developed. And before that, quickly, I just want to talk to you about what is a score. Okay. So currently, what's happening in the industry? People are comparing 2 numbers. The one number is a return number. This fund at plus 12, this fund at plus 16, and most of the people are going into that for human reasons. That's just the way we are wired. It's a comfortable decision to make. Okay? But if you change that conversation away from what was the performance and you look at 2 different numbers, what was the score? Okay, you can actually make a very informed decision. Now quickly, what is a score? I would use gymnastics as a prime example. When I look at a gymnast or a 2, what I know about gymnastics is the one that sort of sticks the landing, I give the thumbs up. Okay, but in the background, there's actually judges sitting and looking at the correct things, which I'm not going to try and explain. But are people, are the toes pointed and all of those type of things, right? But at the end of it, you get a result which tells you which of these 2 is the best performing one based on the item that they are competing in. Okay, so we've created something called an OBI score, and you can clearly see here when you look at the score, even though at this point, if you've never seen it before, you would know that an 80 is better than a 68. It's a score out of 100. Okay, but what the score is actually telling you is we've looked at 4 things that is important for a client. What is important for a client? Let's say myself, if I'm doing an investment. If I need to get to something like a CPI plus 6 outcome, is the portfolio that has been constructed for me, does it have a high probability of actually achieving CPI plus 6? Okay. Where it misses CPI plus 6, by how much does it miss CPI plus 6? And then in the short term, if it can potentially do negative less than the other fund, it's better. And when it does negative, it shouldn't do it significantly negative. Okay. So if you look at those 4 things, if you can construct a portfolio that can do these 4 things very well, is basically the same as getting a high score in gymnastics. So you'll get a high OBI score. And this is a very different way of constructing portfolios. So currently, people are looking at a return, last 12 months versus last 12 months. If you look at a score of an 80 versus a 68, there's a few benefits and there's a few biases that we remove from the process. One of the benefits is this return number. A a return number is not necessarily linked to your outcome that you need. Okay, with an OBR score it is, because we construct the score different for different client needs. Okay? The clients can actually better understand what it is that they are buying. Because we give the insight into the 4 factors that makes up the score, clients can see that, okay, I'm buying a portfolio. This portfolio could potentially do minus 10%. Okay? But the probability of getting there in the long run is much better than this portfolio that can never do negative. So they can make more informed decisions. And then if you look at the biases, it removes past performance bias or recent past performance bias significantly. Because on the previous slide, I'll just show you this number of rolling return periods actually says that we've analyzed the previous 64 fund fact sheets one against the other to understand, what is the best sort of fitted portfolio for this client outcome or client need. Everyone flocks into the same funds in the industry every single year. And also a brand bias, it removes it. It's actually the numbers are telling you where you should be investing. And then lastly, the outcome bias. And the outcome bias for me is, again, don't judge a decision by the result. I'm not saying we're not going to give a good result. I'm saying look at the decision and make the right decision for the right client. So here, if we were sitting at the beginning of 2008 and a client wasn't willing to commit his money to a CPI plus 6 portfolio, and he said, I'm only going to invest into a conservative portfolio because that is what I do. In this toolkit, we would be able to show this client that, the probability of you getting to CPI plus 6 over a long term is actually basically 0 if you go into this portfolio. Okay. If we scored that portfolio would have scored 44. Okay? If you then, and that's the comfortable decision, but now you can show a client visually, this is the effect of your comfortable decision. Greg actually had a nice analogy about being seasick. Okay, yeah, you're not going to get seasick on the voyage, but you're probably not going to get to the shore. Okay, if you go into the right decision and you go into a portfolio that has the potential that you could get seasick initially, a lot of negative returns if things go bad, here you can see that the probability of you getting to CPI plus 6 is quite high. CPI plus 6 is quite high, and therefore we would score that portfolio at an 86. Okay, so with this toolkit that is available to you, just talk to your momentum consultant. We've actually given you the decision-making prosthetics to really get your clients onto an outcomes-based investing approach. Thank you. I think we can potentially take questions in the wine tasting, or there's a question. Outcomes-based investing. Very nice. Thanks. Can you get access to the same type of? Yes, you can. There's a link. Your investment consultant can give it to you. Otherwise, your investment BDM has it. It's actually okay. Now I can't click back, but that's one slide that I showed you was actually the tool, and it's available basically at this point in time as freeware that you can just go onto the site and use it.